So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really do encourage you tonight and the rest of the summit to ask questions, but also to just take notice of who else is joining in on the sessions. Because, although we're not all in the same physical room together, there's still a lot of opportunity to meet new people and reconnect with old ones. And, feel free to use the chat feature to engage. We'll also follow up this week with a recap and contact information for everyone who's been participating. That said, as you may have noticed, this meeting is being recorded. So I hope you don't have a problem with that. And then we do also have the live transcript on, and I recognize that it's not perfect, but it is nice to have for those who it could be helpful for. I'm really excited to get started on our program tonight and deep dive into fiscal sponsorships and insurance. I think all of you who are here tonight know it's a really actually exciting topic to talk about. But first, I really want to recognize that the places that most of us or all of us are zooming in from tonight, it's in the Portland metro area, which rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, future, and are grateful for their ongoing and vibrant presence. We also acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impact many Indigenous Native American families today. As settlers and guests on these lands, we respect the work of Indigenous leaders and families and pledge to make ongoing efforts to recognize their knowledge, creativity, and resilience. Please take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat, including your name and any organization that you wish to share with us tonight. As I said, our session tonight is focusing on fiscal sponsorships. This grew out of a growing concern for the accessibility of fiscal sponsorship for grassroots organizations, questions around control within a fiscal sponsorship relationship, the desire for a deeper understanding about equitable considerations when providing them, and that big juicy question of what really are options for insurance. To lay out our framework and guide our discussion tonight, we have three leaders in this space: Jim White, Michael Jonas, and Matt Loken. Just to give you a little bit of background on these three lovely individuals. Jim White, he joined the Nonprofit Association of Oregon as the executive director in 2012. Jim is deeply committed to the social change through private action and has worked in the nonprofit sector both domestically and internationally for more than 25 years. He has a passion for affecting systemic change in the way that the public, private, and nonprofit sectors work together to support and strengthen civil society. Through NAO, Jim is proud to help build the capacity, leadership, and voice of Oregon's vibrant nonprofit sector. Thanks for being here tonight, Jim. And then we have Michael Jonas, who is JD MBA and is the principal attorney and owner of Rational Unicorn Legal Services, PC, a community-based business law firm. The firm offers pay-as-you-go legal services, including business formation, contract review and drafting, trademark and copyright applications, and conflict resolution. The firm is a certified Oregon benefit company and strongly believes in and practices the triple bottom line. Passionate about community engagement, Michael dedicates time to volunteering with several nonprofit organizations. He currently serves on 2 nonprofit boards: New Leaders Council, the Hub for Progressive Millennial Thought Leadership, and the Sean Goodman Foundation for Performing Arts. Then we have, thank you, Michael, for being here tonight. Then we have Matt Loken, a native Oregonian, graduated from Pacific Lutheran University in 2000. And since entering the professional world, he worked both in sales and marketing for a variety of businesses before 2006, when he began his career in insurance as a commercial insurance broker for Bliss Sequoia Insurance and Risk Advisors. So since coming on board, Matt has been and continues to specialize in social and human service arena throughout Oregon and Northwest. And in 2011, he made partner. And as he likes to say, I get to work with great people every day, and it is my job to help make sure their mission and assets are protected. Thank you for being here, Matt. So welcome to all three of you. For tonight, before I hand it over, I just want to let you know that they will go through some key pieces about fiscal sponsorships and insurance. And as we go along, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat, but we will save questions for the end, but you don't need to actually save them. You can ask them as we go and we'll be compiling them. The other thing, I just want to take a moment and give a special thank you to our sponsor, Columbia Bank, as well as to our steering committee members who brought this critical issue of fiscal sponsorship to the front of the line. So I'm going to hand it over now to our dream team, we'll call them. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jessica. I think I'm first up. Hello, everybody. This is Jim White from the Nonprofit Association of Oregon. Very happily here in Portland, where it's slightly rainy. I think most of you are here experiencing that. Jessica or Sabrina, are you going to share the slides?
I will right now. Okay. Would you like me to start?
Great. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to walk you through a couple of slides tonight. We're going to try not to be too heavy on slides, but we thought it might be useful for folks who might want to think about some of what we're going to talk about in a couple of different ways, graphically, as well as hearing it orally and then being able to read it as well. So again, thanks to Jessica and Sabrina and the Portland Parks Foundation for having us here tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. You can switch to the next slide now. So what we're going to talk about is what is exactly fiscal sponsorship? What are the different types of fiscal sponsorship? And we're gonna zero in on two particular types. There are several different types, but we're gonna, we'll kind of show you what all of them are, but we're gonna zero in on two specific types that are most common for emerging organizations and groups to use. We think it's important for what you need to know as the sponsor. I know some of the groups here are either considering or already existing sponsors of other groups. And then what are the kinds of things that you need to know as the sponsoree, the group who's being sponsored or considered for sponsorship. We want to kind of give you some ideas of some practices, some best practices for both parties, including these issues of insurance and the legal aspects and the risk mitigation that you have to be involved and be thinking about. And of course, we want to keep in mind throughout all of this, the cultural need of mutual aid and balancing social justice and service with the formalities and these legalities that we're kind of dealing with whenever you're dealing with something like fiscal sponsorship. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. If you're not interested in any of that, you might want to save your time and sign up for Jessica's next session. But I think most folks are interested in at least some component of that. Next slide. So fiscal sponsorship is an agreement. So this becomes a legal agreement with a project or an entity that doesn't have the tax exempt status. So in the United States, unfortunately, and I do say that, and I'm, the executive director of NAO, I love nonprofits, but unfortunately we define good works by private individuals in society. We describe those through a tax status. It goes way back. It's systemic in nature. At some point, I hope you'll all gather together with me and many others across the US and overthrow that entire sense of that's how we describe ourselves. But the statute is the statute. It's the way that things are currently being understood in society. And so you do have to have this tax exempt capacity to be able to work charitably and give receipts. You can work charitably all day long anytime you want, right? You just won't be able to receive funds from some type of a foundation or other contributed person, entity that then would like to actually have a tax exemption for that. gift or for that support that they give you. And that's the important distinction. There are plenty of people in our society who are doing great work every day and helping society. And we're going to talk a little about the mutual aid organizations. In fact, 43% of Oregonians volunteer. That ranks us third in the nation in volunteerism. That's pretty darn impressive, right? That's that many people out there doing good. Most of them are doing it through one of these legal structures, though. Not everybody, but most. And so as there's new and emerging organizations that are coming up and they want to try to figure out how can they possibly get grant funding, or how could they attract donors to their initiative, to the mission that they're trying to serve, they need to meet some requirements. And one of those would be that they're going to have some charitability status determined. So a fiscal sponsorship, it is an agreement with these existing tax exempt organizations and these groups that are not yet tax exempt, have not gotten that that recognition under the law. The project itself, regardless of whether it has that status, it must meet the normal status or the normal definition of being charitable in nature, right? Any charitable funds must go through a sponsor nonprofit. They can't go through the entity or direct to the entity and then up to the sponsor and then back down again. So those who might be using Venmo or other, crowdsourcing techniques, it's really important that you make sure that funds given to a sponsored organization go through the sponsor. And the sponsor and sponsorees need to be aware of the rules associated with fiscal sponsorship. And that's what we're going to get into a little bit now. Next slide. So the legal framework for fiscal sponsorship, I'm just going to briefly name these, and I'm going to turn it over to Michael to dive a little bit more deeply into this. But it's basically the level of autonomy the project has to be in balance with the authorities that the sponsorship allows under the law. So there are basically these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of fiscal sponsorship. There's even a seventh you can do, an LLC, but it's very rare. But most fiscal sponsorships are either a direct project, they're an independent contractor project. So think of your arts groups that might be funding, acting as the fiscal sponsor for an artist, right? They're a pre-approved grant relationship. They're a group exemption. They're a supporting organization. So this is some kind of a support organization that's been created specifically to do these kinds of programs like a PEO. And then there's some type of fiscal sponsorship for technical assistance, for giving technical assistance. I wanted to name early on, and I'll put it in the chat, there's some really great resources that are available, and we have these at the end as well. But the Colvin book on fiscal sponsorship is really the seminal book on how this works and how fiscal sponsorship works in America. So next slide. So in the apparatus of these fiscal sponsorships, there's many different pieces of the legalities and the different characteristics that you need to have. These little red circles are a little bit offset, but really what we're trying to draw attention to here are A and C are the two most common types of fiscal sponsorship. And what we wanted you to be aware of, these basic characteristics, that the project of a direct sponsorship belongs to the sponsor and is implemented by its employees and volunteers. The difference of a pre-approved grant relationship is that the project applies to the sponsor for one or a series of grants, and the sponsor funds the project only to the extent that the money is received from the donors that are giving it to them. There's plenty of more detail in how all these different versions work, but we're going to dive really mostly into these two because these are the two that you're going to see most commonly, and I'm sure these are the ones that you're probably most interested in. So next slide. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Michael to talk more about the legal framework. And you can see here, we've got like a graphic of how the funds and the sources work for these different types of fiscal sponsorship. Michael?
Hi, everybody. So basically what Jim was saying is there's actually 6 types of fiscal sponsorship relationships, 7 if you count having a for-profit LLC fall under a nonprofit. So for example, a housing organization who owns a building might have a for-profit building underneath their nonprofit. So there are 7 ways. These 2 are the most prominent that we see, and so that's why we're talking about them. So the first one is the direct project on the left. The direct project, there's no legal difference between the sponsor and the funding source. So basically, it's kind of an employer-employee relationship, and the sponsor is the one who's getting all the donations. So they're basically bringing all the donations in, and then they're doing a project under their roof, versus an outside project where maybe the sponsor would collect those monies, but they would be giving it to a different group with either its own entity or its own organizational structure. So that might be, a mutual aid organization that we know of that needs to do their own project outside of the sponsorship relationship, but maybe hasn't set up their own business. So direct project is that project is it's housed under the sponsorship of that overarching organization. Whereas the pre-approved grant relationship, it's an outside project being funded to that group. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything, but one of the distinctions is for the pre-approved grant relationship. Chances are that they have their own business entity, or they could. Whereas with the direct project, that doesn't have to happen. It could just be a project that people do under the auspices of that framework, whether they're an employee or they're collaborating within that business or organization. So there are all kinds of sponsorship rewards. You can do reputational lifts. So if a nonprofit raises a lot of money, has good marketing, you can work with them as a fiscal sponsoree, and you can do resource sharing. You can collaborate. You can ask someone at the nonprofit to help with answering phones or with fundraising. So there's a lot of collaboration, resource sharing, and things like that. And sometimes there's legal and liability coverage. So it may be that the fiscal sponsor has insurance, and we have an insurance person to talk to today, has insurance that covers what the fiscal sponsoree does. So there's all these rewards. One of the biggest rewards that we know of is the EIN. The EIN is tied to tax exemption, being one of the 501Cs. There's actually 29, so that's how you get 501c3. So there's a beauty of this, because organizations who don't want to have their own business entity or can't, or want to try a project, can essentially raise nonprofit funds underneath a pre-existing nonprofit who has gotten their federal exemption with the IRS. The problem with that is, just like everything, there are rewards, but there are also a lot of risks. One of those being that someone who you fiscal sponsor, the sponsoree, can create liabilities or reasons why the IRS audits, or legal issues, all kinds of things that the fiscal sponsor would be responsible for, depending on the fiscal sponsorship agreement, the insurance that they have, and what was agreed to between the parties. The next slide. So these are some of the other things besides just legal related. We have mission drift. there's lots of times where someone will want to do a good thing and take on a fiscal sponsoree, but what happens is it goes in a whole other direction in the organization, or they're using all of their resources. You know, I thought this was just going to be us administering your donations. It became you taking over our office and our marketing and our staff and potentially causing the whole organization to revamp. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not a good thing. That could be a bad thing. Reputational. If an organization that is the fiscal sponsor is sponsoring a fiscal sponsoree that gets into legal issues or causes violence or does something that's questionable, whether that's good or bad, that falls back both from a liability perspective and to a reputational perspective to the overarching nonprofit that the fiscal sponsor is sponsor, or sorry, that falls to the fiscal sponsor. So whatever the fiscal sponsoree is doing from a liability or a reputational thing will tie back to the fiscal sponsor. This is really important, and you know, we're going to talk about insurance as well, but if the fiscal sponsoree is doing more than you agreed to, or doing more that violates the type of nonprofit status you have. So as you know, we have 501c3s and 4s and 6s. Some can do political lobbying or activism, some can't. If you're sponsoring someone, say you're a 501c3 and you're not supposed to be doing endorsing of campaigns specifically or endorsing of specific candidates. If your fiscal sponsoree does that, it could cause the IRS to audit you or to take away your status, or to cause you to have to file for another nonprofit status that would allow you to do the political work. So that's another thing, is making sure that the activities that the fiscal sponsoree are doing are aligned with your type of nonprofit, because if they're not, then you can get into trouble for that. And qualification. And I think what this means, and Jim and I have talked about this a lot, this idea of just giving out your EIN number, you know, to anybody. And this is something we talk about where we want to intentionally help people, especially mutual aid organizations, because they may not have the ability or the time. So what happens is someone may be well-intentioned because they're out there giving people soup or water or jackets, but they don't have a permit for that and they get into trouble. Or maybe there's liability, or maybe they're giving out their personal bank account or their Venmo account, and then we're having nonprofit funds go into someone's personal bank account. What happens is, if we don't be sure to qualify nonprofits, or not nonprofits, fiscal sponsorees, and make sure that they're doing things that are aligned with what the nonprofit compliance rules are for the state, the Oregon Department of Justice Charitable Division oversees nonprofit solicitation. So it's possible that your nonprofit could have a DOJ complaint for a fiscal sponsoree based on your fiscal sponsoree's behavior or actions. So there's this constant need. How do we get organizations like mutual aid organizations out there helping people, but also make sure that they follow the necessary rules so that there isn't an issue? Because if not only if they have to stop doing their mutual aid work, but if the organization sponsoring them gets their tax exemption taken away or gets audited or has liability against them, neither party will be able to do what they need to do. So that's really important, is just making sure that those rules are discussed and are followed. Sponsorees risks. So control. A lot of times someone will give money. I mean, and this goes kind of with what Jim White was saying about systematic racism or institutionalization. So especially with mutual aid groups, this idea that we have a formal structure, you're doing great work, but you don't. We're going to give you our EIN number, but we're going to tell you exactly what you have to do and how you have to do it. And so you're sort of stuck as a sponsoree, potentially, if you don't have a good relationship, where you need to have that EIN so you can get tax deductions and you can be following IRS rules, but then you may get into a situation where you realize you're under that control and it's not helpful for you. The rent and EIN shop, I alluded to this before. A lot of sponsorees will just take an EIN. We've seen people email out like in mass bulk, hey, give me an EIN, I need to do this tax thing, or I need to. So there's a big risk in that because it goes both ways. If you get an EIN from someone who shouldn't be a fiscal sponsor and they're not managing your money well, they're not giving you the money that you've raised, you getting that EIN only is not going to be very helpful for you because they're going to be administering the money that comes in and then putting it into your account. So if you don't trust them, but they were very quick to give you that EIN for the tax deduction, that's not going to be helpful for you. Sponsorees risk, little or poor back office support, lack of adequate liability coverage. We'll talk about that today. Matt will talk about insurance. There are times that if you don't have a formal entity, you may not get the insurance that you need. And so you have to make sure that either your fiscal sponsor can get insurance or somebody somewhere can get insurance. One of the things you also may need, and I didn't put this on here, is a volunteer liability waiver. So knowing where all the legal gaps are. So if you're a sponsoree, it doesn't matter that you're part of a fiscal sponsorship. If you're the sponsoree and you're doing things in the street, like marches and raising money with crowd, like maybe some of the people should be signing some sort of volunteer waiver, an assumption of risk. If you're going to be marching today on the street, we ask that as you're signing up, you read these terms and you know that by being there, you're in danger, you're putting yourself in danger. So those are some of the things. Intellectual property rights, more so intellectual property rights if you're doing the direct sponsorship, the one where you're falling under the auspices of that nonprofit, you're like a project within a nonprofit. You have to be careful because that's looked upon as an employer-employee relationship. And so there's this question of what that sponsored organization is making intellectually, content and things like that, workbooks, art, who is owning it? Is it the fiscal sponsor or the sponsoree? So that's a risk, is there could be confusion as to who owns the intellectual property that's being created. And then hidden costs. There's always hidden costs with things. And now we have Matt to talk about insurance.
Okay. So I'm going to go quickly through the insurance piece here because I do want to have plenty of time for the Q&A. So hopefully there'll be lots of good questions and we can dive back into this. But I've got a couple pages here, bullet points that wanted everyone to have in writing so you can actually take and use this down the road. So the first bullet point there is just talking about insurable interests. And that is where essentially, like Michael mentioned, you need to think of the sponsoree as being a program or a subcommittee of the nonprofit that's taking you on as the fiscal sponsor. That's the way the insurance world looks at it. It's pretty simplified in that sense. So then the next bullet point there is, as a fiscal sponsor, they'd be responsible for the exposures and liabilities of the sponsoree. And again, that's where the insurance companies are looking at what type of exposures are you bringing on with this fiscal sponsoree, and does it fit within the insurance company's underwriting guidelines? So I'm going to jump into that here in just a moment. And then of course, insurance is always contract driven. And so best practice is to have a MOU or a contract between the sponsor and sponsoree that clearly states that the sponsor is taking responsibility for the sponsoree's work or project that you're doing. That's important. It helps the insurance guide the process in the event of a claim should one happen. Hopefully it's all for naught and everybody's just signing things while everybody's smiling. But something happens, we want to have a contract in place to really help guide the process and try and help things be smooth as possible. So then, of course, under the MOU and contract, there's a checkpoint in there to double check with the sponsor's insurance agent and underwriter to make sure that the exposure for the sponsoree is acceptable to your insurance company. And also, you're going to want to make sure it's acceptable, but you want to know if there's going to be an additional cost, what that would be. And oftentimes, there's going to be some elements of loss control requirements. For example, running driving records, running background checks, those kinds of things are very common. And so it's good to know what those would be so there's good continuity in place for everyone going forward. So then the next bullet point down there is the fiscal sponsor must have oversight of the sponsoree. And this has been touched on prior in this PowerPoint, but from an insurance perspective, that stands true as well. And so it's the decision representation specifically that needs to have basically a board member or a staff sitting on the subcommittee or the sub-sponsorees activity group, taking part and having some control and some decision process built into it. Then the loss control continuity I touched on already, but like Michael mentioned, waivers are a great tool. I recommend them. At times, they're only as good as the paper they're written on. But my ongoing joke is that, you know, they really do a great job of weeding out the insincere. And the insurance companies actually provide waivers that are put together by their legal departments. So if anybody wants waivers, feel free to reach out to me. We've got a library full of them, and I'm happy to share them. And please make them your own. The insurance companies actually encourage it. So feel free to do that. And then I've got other background checks listed on here, motor vehicle records, which I've already mentioned. So we can go to the next slide there. Okay, so just under miscellaneous, of course, there's potential for some very good cost savings by using a fiscal sponsoree. And what you're running into is minimum premium thresholds versus being endorsed or added on to the sponsor's actual insurance portfolio. So it's basically, it's economy to scale. So when you're buying in bulk, you've got more exposure out there. The insurance company really does give better rates on that. So again, checking with your agent, your insurance company, seeing what the additional cost is, likely it's going to be much, much better and help keep money in the program. So then the next bullet point there is just pointing out examples of what you might find within the insurance portfolio itself. So it's, of course, it starts with property, then it jumps into crime. And crime is actually primarily focused in on employee or volunteer theft of money and or materials. So that's something for consideration's sake. Oftentimes that is actually now being included in contract requirements or grant requirements. Accident medical, Michael mentioned this one. And so one of the things you'll find out on the next slide here is the parks actually do provide some protections as long as you're in one of their sponsored activities with a staff member on site. So my recommendation is to always try and transfer risk and put it back onto the parks if you can. That's by design, that's what they want. And it'll keep your insurance costs down significantly by doing that. So that way, hopefully what you're really doing is you're just ensuring other than park related activities, things like fundraising, board meetings, maybe doing some booth work at some fairs, things like that. That's really inexpensive to insure. So that's one way to help with the cost savings. General liability, trip and fall, professional liability, if you're actually doing any design work, which probably isn't the case. But if you're doing any kind of design work, there's a professional liability that's there. You might know it as errors and omissions. And then, of course, if you're working with any vulnerable populations with projects and programs out there, that would be typically youth, so children, also people with disabilities and the elderly. Those are the primary vulnerable populations. If you've got that exposure, then that's a very real exposure that you definitely want to take a look at insurance. Right now, the cost of settlements for those types of lawsuits and insurance claims are going up and up and up. So definitely important if you got the exposure, get the insurance. And then of course, auto liability. So you'd want to make sure if you're going to have folks driving on behalf of the program that you'd want to make sure there's some auto liability coverage there called non-owned auto liability, lays over the top of your personal auto liability and further protects the organization and the board for the decisions putting you behind the wheel because they've got a dog in the fight for your driving as a volunteer. So next slide. Okay, and so this is the actual language that we got from the Portland Parks and Recreation folks. And you'll see that it's highlighted in that second bullet point specifically that as long as they've got a staff member on site, the project would be actually covered under the Parks division, which is great because then everybody there volunteering is considered a volunteer of Portland Parks, and therefore you're covered under their coverage. And then up above, it does mention that if an individual organization wants to reserve that same lawn for a large event, they need to get a permit and event insurance. That would be for something like a special event, doing a concert, something like that is what they're referencing. And special event policies, you can buy just single day, 2-day, 3-day, whatever the case might be, special event policies for those kinds of things. So I'll go ahead and stop talking and go ahead and turn it back over.
Michael, did you want to jump in here, or do you want me to do these?
Sure. Or we both can. So, you know, fiscal sponsorships and fiscal sponsorship agreements, the law is always changing. You have to be very careful with following not just nonprofit law and making sure that your agreement is in compliance with both the DOJ and the IRS, but that it's also a contract that's legally enforceable and binding, and there's no gaps in liability, and you know what's covered. One of the things we also have on here is don't commingle funds. What happens is fiscal sponsors and fiscal sponsorees, while they're supposed to have separate bank accounts, sometimes things get mixed. It's very difficult to go back and trace those funds. And ignorance is not an excuse for breaking the law. Jim, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's the big thing. I mean, where we've seen organizations come to us and they're worried or concerned, it's mostly around one of these disclarities. They didn't feel like the fiscal sponsor fully gave them an understanding of the level of control and the amount of the relationship that this organization would have with what used to maybe be its own kind of running fast, very streets driven organization, group. I think there's a lot to be said around getting really clear in defining the relationship. I just want to underscore that one in particular.
Yeah, and then we get a lot of questions about, can a fiscal sponsor charge an administration fee? And the answer is they can, but make sure that that's in your agreement. If they start charging 10%, you thought it was 5%, for example. So it's really important in the agreement to not just have, is this just an EIN, or are we sharing resources? Are we sharing staff? How are we marketing? Are we sharing intellectual property? Who is doing the admin of this? So if we're a fiscal sponsoree and we need money from our funds, do we have to go through some roundabout way, or is there one contact at the organization? So all of those things should be set clear on whichever side you're on, because if you don't set those things clear, there's, in the busy world that we're living in, there's just a lot of scrambling, and there's a lot of issues and a lot of things that could go wrong, and then we have to unpack them all. So it's really important that you have a fiscal sponsorship agreement that's written, but also with very specific terms about what you're looking for your organization.
I think we can probably stop sharing the slides now, Jessica or Sabrina, and we could probably jump into some of the questions. We'll flash up at the end here the resources. But I think we want to make sure, that there's plenty of time to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, Matt, and Michael. I want to just open up the floor, and happy to ask some questions as well. I see there's one in the queue, but what's great is they provided a great sort of legal background in terms of all these considerations. And I know individuals here are from both sides of the equation, and also kind of curious about that insurance issue. And so just feel free to open the floor, and they're here to work out any issues you might be having or concerns. I will just start by this first question by Will. Are there credit requirements or other requirements for the signatories on the sponsoree side when signing any contracts with the sponsor?
Well, with the,
Oh, sorry.
do you want to go, Michael? Well, I can do it quickly and then you give your interpretation, but the relationship will still be between an entity, right, and another entity. So the sponsor is a 501c3. The other group may not have yet a legal 501c3 from the feds, but they can get registered here in Oregon as a public benefit corporation. And I would highly recommend that rather than be an just a volunteer group of people coming together, because then they have a lot less coverage of under the law. And Michael, this is your bailiwick, but when it comes to credit, I would not think that the individuals involved with this sponsoree organization would have their credit checked. It's merely that they are the representatives of an entity, some kind of a thing that's happening, and they can create that entity through getting a public benefit corporation status here in Oregon, even though they're not a 501c3 yet. Michael?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. When we think of credit, we think of it being tied to an individual. And so even if the fiscal sponsoree is not yet a nonprofit, they're still seen as a group or a company or organization. So the individual credit of someone involved really shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be up to that. As a fiscal sponsor, I mean, you can ask certain things to make sure that the sponsoree is responsible, right? So you can require them to have their own insurance. You can require them to use their own volunteer liability waivers. You can ask that they report certain things to you based on either their activities with programming or their activities with fundraising. They could do regular reports, for example. But typically a credit requirement, we don't really see that, and I would frown upon it. Is this public benefit status through the state of Oregon?
Yeah, so this would be registering as a public benefit corporation. It's through the Secretary of State. So all corporations are registered in Oregon, and nonprofits are corporations as well in the eyes of the government, right? It's just that some have profit-making motives and some have they're public support organizations or charities, or they're mutual benefit organizations, and those are the nonprofit groups. And so to be a public benefit corporation in Oregon, you would go through a series of steps with the Secretary of State's office. And we would just highly advise that rather than be and sort of they're called, what is it, Michael, UVAs, like unrelated volunteer affiliates or something. That there's just sort of a term of phrase that lawyers have created to describe things that aren't anything yet. A group of people coming together and trying to do something.
Yeah, that's right. So I think one thing that might be helpful is you can be, I mean, there's a wide range of like what we call business for good. So you can be, somebody or group doing something good, and you can be under a fiscal sponsor. You can start your own for-profit LLC that's a social enterprise or benefit company. You could start your own nonprofit. There's a wide range of things that you can do. When you form an LLC at the state level, you're a pass-through entity. Or you form a corporation at the state level, you don't have tax exemption yet. So it's either having the fiscal sponsor or going through the federal nonprofit application, which gets you the federal tax exemption. And then you take that federal tax exemption back to the state and you get state exemption. So the question with certain organizations is, well, what are you trying to do here? You know, do you want to be a project and then fall under an organization? Do you want to be separate? Do you want to be for-profit, nonprofit? You want to be for-profit social enterprise? So there's sort of options with things. The biggest mistake people make is that they have gaps in liability and they don't know where they stand. And so it ends up that they're not covered. And so something happens, there's a worry about that. So it's kind of a layered thing of entity formation, contracts, insurance, and what you're doing, complying with those nonprofit rules. So it's a layered liability
Am I
protection.
supposed to make my own dinner?
There's a salad in there for you.
Okay.
That was the cutest thing ever.
Yeah, that was great.
The thing that Jim, and sorry I'm rambling, but the other thing is that Jim, you might have been talking about too, is when you form a nonprofit at the state level, you can decide whether it's for specific members, like Dental Association of Oregon, right? It's for dentists. If you're not a dentist, you can't be in it. It's still a nonprofit. Versus public, you know, benefiting the general public. So when we file, we can kind of determine who we're standing for. Are we, you know, for a certain profession or a certain group of people, or is it everybody?
Yeah, and that I think what's important there is to be really clear that the group who wants to seek that charitable benefit, they're not getting the recognition per se, but they're getting the privilege, small p, of using that status through this relationship with the sponsor. They still would need to be charitable in nature. So the work that they're doing has to be of a type that serves a defined charitable nature under still IRS and Oregon Department of Justice basic charitability. So a mutual aid organization that's supporting historically marginalized people in our community will definitely meet that, even you know, given the circumstance that they are a mutual aid, right? So they're serving members of their community, members of their group. It begins to get trickier as they get their federal recognition, and they well, not trickier, they just have to be really clearly defined that service is for public benefit and for charitable benefit. So looks like Kirk, should I answer, just jump in here? I'm going to read this.
Yeah, go for it.
Are there situations where a fiscal sponsoree who has someone being paid as an independent contractor for their program delivery from a project grant be required to be staff member for the sponsor nonprofit, or are they always required to be an independent contractor? I mean, now you're kind of getting into employment law, which a fiscal sponsoree, you know, depending on the structure of which kind of fiscal sponsorship, may or may not have employees, because it really starts to get complicated then on who that employee belongs to. So, you know, Michael, do you want to jump in here and see if?
Yeah. So the famous lawyer answer you get is it depends. The contractor employee world, it's what we call a totality test. So it's, we look at all of the things, not just one. So did that person have to come in every single day? And the hours were controlled. Were they given a computer? Were they given an ability to work another job or not? So I think the question though is specifically for this, does a fiscal sponsoree have to be a staff member for the sponsor nonprofit? The answer is no. I mean, there's there's arrangements for sharing staff or sharing resources, but there's no default that when you have a fiscal sponsorship that you have to share staff or you have to share contractors or employees. And then when hiring someone, you have to be very clear about that too, that you know, how are they being paid and are you sharing them? So the answer is no, there's no default for that. And then are they always required to be an independent contractor? No. You can be a fiscal sponsor, you can hire you could be a fiscal sponsor or a fiscal sponsoree, and you can have a contractor or an employee. Even a private party could hire their own employee or their own fiscal sponsoree. So your entity type, or if you're sponsored or not sponsored, it doesn't dictate whether or not you have to hire a contractor or employee. You could pick which one that you want or which one you need, as long as we're following those distinctions and we're contracting right for them, right? So for example, an employee payroll and a W-4 and W-2 and an employment contract at will, a contractor agreement, a W-9, you give them a 1099. So there's no requirements for any of that. It's that you have to communicate what you're trying to do, contract for it, and then you also have to follow it, especially in Oregon, because Oregon, if you misclassify, say you think you have a contractor, but just because you call them that or you contract for that, the state may say that you actually have an employee, and if you're not paying payroll taxes, then you could be penalized for that.
And from an insurance perspective, it is actually perfectly fine to insure independent contractors, employees, or volunteers. Again, it goes back to the insurable interest and making sure everything's in writing through a contract, something that can help guide the insurance company. And then, of course, getting pre-approval with the underwriter and making sure everything's documented is going to be key on that component. But typically, it's not a problem.
And in Oregon, for employees, you have to have by law workers' comp insurance for all employees. For contractor, you don't have to have workers' comp insurance. So there's all kinds of insurance, and Matt can talk to you about it. But of the types of insurance, also know that if you have an employee, you have to have workers' comp insurance for them.
I see that.
Do you
Oh,
just
go
want
ahead,
to ask
Jim.
a question, Jessica?
Yeah, I had a question. You know, it's hard, you know, Matt, you're talking about some of the pieces of oversight, right? That as a fiscal sponsor, when providing insurance, one of them I think was that you need to have some sort of oversight, right? And like either as a form of a committee, having been engaged in fiscal sponsorships where they're not super, you know, we're providing not a ton of resources, but just minimal. So how do you kind of balance? I guess I'm wondering to not try to come in and feel like you're asking for control. Is there like kind of advice around that? And or is that just a conversation that says this has to happen?
Yeah, I would say that first off, that the vetting process, making sure everybody understands really what's being asked, and that culturally people are going to get along and have good understanding with transparency, like Michael has mentioned, really get into the details and be very clear with what's being asked of each other as the sponsor and sponsoree. So I think most of that can be tackled on the front end from my experience. And as long as that process is really adhered to and everybody's comfortable going into it smiling, I've always seen that work out pretty well.
If I can, I think that the place where where sometimes there's misunderstandings is as organizations change, and in our current environment, it feels like we're all changing every 3 months, if not once between Monday and Friday, right? You have to have a level of communication that is identifying those issues which may influence or be governed, small g, by the fiscal sponsor agreement. So an organization that is being fiscally sponsored suddenly receiving government money may have enormous ramifications on the sponsor upstream, right? That the sponsoree may not even think about, like, hey, you know, Portland Civic Life wants to give us money, and we're going to get that money, and it's going to be great for our organization. We're going to be able to hold more cultural events. But there's all kinds of compliance related issues which then flow upstream to that sponsor. And so the how the money is flowing, who it's coming from matters in a lot of cases. It's not all money looks the same. Well, it does look the same, but it's not all treated the same as it goes through the pipeline into these organizations and through the fiscal sponsor. And so having, you know, to the earlier question around a contractor possibly being hired on the staff, I mean, the person's been working with the team for a year already. Everybody knows, you know, that person. And then the fiscal sponsoree deciding, well, we're moving that person from a contractor status to a staff status, but never telling the fiscal sponsor could create, again, enormous repercussions up and downstream, right? So that's where we've seen problems, and you know, unfortunately, sometimes even antagonisms get created between the sponsor and the sponsoree when there's just not a good line of communication.
Are there resources out there for almost like questions that fiscal sponsorees should be asking as they engage into a fiscal sponsorship?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, Jessica, because Michael and I have committed to try and work on creating something like that, almost like a FAQ sheet. And I've begun to draft some things. And Matt, we'd love to have your part in this as well, that we could produce a basically there are out on the web, you can look for stuff and see stuff, but we'd like to make something that's specific to Oregon so that both the fiscal sponsoree and the fiscal sponsor know what they should be asking when they're seeking each other or when they're offering to each other the relationship.
And to that end, yeah, I think it'd be great because you have your process as somebody who's sponsoring, but what's happening to make sure that you're also protecting the process on the other side, and having the relationship feel good on both ends. Do you have a recommendation around like to how often to like review the actual fiscal sponsorship agreement? Does that happen?
Are you asking me or Michael?
I'm asking any of you or anyone in the room.
Well, I would say at a minimum once a year, but I would also add any time that there's some kind of a change that either side believes might change the relationship. So we just added people, or we're going to go out and do a new program. It may have a flow to liability insurance that has to change, or something actually in the fiscal agreement might need to change legally. But I'll kick it over to that. I would say at least once a year, but Michael.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think it's a little bit different from other contracts, like a partnership agreement you would want every year. I would say every couple months. And I do know that some of my clients, whichever side they're on, they like for the fiscal sponsoree to tell them potential money sources that they're going to be working on or filing. So it doesn't mean that, you know, every single grant application or every single fundraising thing, but it's good to talk to your fiscal sponsor and say, like, this year we're going after 3 new grants. We've never gone after them. This is what those look like. So yeah, I think the takeaway is every couple of months, or if something is approaching that's significant, either a large event, a large funding stream, a need for more staff or more resources, a change in the relationship. So it goes from, you know, kind of an EIN advisory role to a being in the office using resources. Okay, we need to have a contract change.
And from the insurance aspect, I would definitely recommend that the agent that is representing you is brought into the fold with changes to program and products that you're putting out there, whatever it might be. Like Jim mentioned, there very well could be a liability consideration there, and we're going to want to make sure, one, that you are insured for it, and here's how. Or two, if there needs to be some changes made, for example, adding a totally different program into the insurance portfolio, oftentimes will mean that we need to go ahead and add that program onto the policy, running it by the underwriter, getting it rated. You're going to want to know what the cost and the quality of the coverage is on the front end before you actually do that. And then at the same time, you might find that it maybe is not cost effective. And so the cost of insurance based on the perceived exposure is going to be well beyond what the underwriter is willing to underwrite. And that's good to know just from a risk perspective. It gives you some, shed some light on the situation. Essentially, the risk is being audited by the insurance company to help you understand, really, is this something we want to do? So there can be some benefits to that as well.
Thanks, Matt.
Mhm.
I'm curious in this room, if everybody wants to raise their hand, who's here is actually providing fiscal sponsorships in their organization? I'm raising our hand too. And then who here, thanks Leslie and Kirk. Leslie, will you remind me who you're here with? And Catherine, yeah. You could write it in the chat if you would like. I know you did earlier, but and then who here is involved in is a fiscal sponsoree? Okay, yeah, thanks, Catherine. No one is, okay. So Friends of Portland Community Gardens, great. What I would be curious, those who are providing fiscal sponsorships, what are some of the sort of biggest things that you're grappling with in your program? And we have a question right now too. Feel free to write it in the chat. Okay, so when a sponsor enters into a contracted relationship with a sponsoree, are there mechanisms in place to protect abuse in either direction? More specifically, outside of the contract between your two parties, is there a path for getting complaints addressed?
So there's a couple things. One, I really like to add into the contract a couple clauses that address that. So it's kind of frou-frou, but the court looks down upon non-disparagement clauses. So I often add what we call a respectful communication clause, where we say that if there are issues prior to dragging on social media or filing suit or any of that, we will talk about issues and figure them out. I also like to add a mediation clause to the contract so that if either party is thinking of suing, if they can't figure out from a negotiation, a regular communication thing, they would contractually be bound. So it would say, if this fiscal sponsorship agreement, if we can't figure it out, we're going to go to a mediator, we're going to have a third party neutral help us out. The other thing I've seen is community guidelines. So a lot of organizations, they have community guidelines that you have to follow. So just like the board may follow that, you can, in the fiscal sponsorship agreement, put, both parties, this fiscal sponsorship agreement also have to follow our organizational community guidelines. And so those community guidelines potentially have rules about communicating and problem solving and core values and all of those things. So that is a way to do it. There's also putting in the fiscal sponsorship, like any contract, termination for will. So like, how would either of us be able to get out of this agreement if we weren't doing well? You know, is it that I can give you notice or you can give me notice? And then we also have termination for cause terms that we can add. So if the fiscal sponsoree, for example, does something violent, then you as the fiscal sponsor, instead of having to prove breach of contract, you would say, well, that termination for cause violence section causes me to be able to terminate this agreement. So there's a wide variety of mechanisms. The other thing is to think of processes that you want. So you know, if you have a complaint or you have an issue with the money management or the admin, you know, put it like, this is our procedure. You know, first you tell us that I have a complaint and then we review it. You know, you're sort of, if you can, a contract know exactly what the answer is, you can at least give processes for that. So kind of a combination of all of those things together, that's how we get to having good relationships. And then if they go sour, instead of going from contract to suing or dragging in the mud, we have a variety of other pieces to pull from: community guidelines, mediation, respectful communication.
Thanks, Michael. Let's see. Oh, great. 40-mile loop, Jim. Thanks. Nice to have you here. Another question I would ask, I guess, is I'm curious when we go back to that piece about if you have a sponsoree that, let's say, is lobbying or starts lobbying. That was my interest perked up. So can you contract in a way where you're just fiscally sponsoring a portion of their activities, or like kind of excluding the, if they engage in this, like you're only sponsoring a certain portion of what they're doing? I come down, you know, I guess I think about certain organizations that may be lobbying for a political candidate, let's say, or, you know, working on a political campaign for a specific candidate. Like, is there a way to kind of not exclude them from doing that, but just contract in a way where you're specific to the one activity?
I suspect Michael's going to want to jump in here, but I just want to make sure that we use the terminology. So nonprofits, 501c3s, and public benefit corporations can lobby under the law. Okay, so because we're big proponents of both advocacy and lobbying for nonprofits, including public benefit organizations. The issue, I think, Jessica, you're raising is electioneering.
Yes.
Right. So can you raise money for candidates? There are a whole bunch of types of nonprofits who can do that. 501c3s and their fiscal sponsorees then would not be able to engage in that. That is strictly forbidden. It's one of the few things that they can't do under the statute at the federal level. So whether you could create an agreement that only governs one part of a fiscal sponsoree's work, I don't know, Michael, I'm going to kick that one to you.
Yeah, so the answer is you could, but it seems to be like it would be really complicated to figure out. And Jim's right, you know, even 501c3s, they do political things. They do voter outreach, they support issues. It's the specific endorsing of a candidate and raising money for that candidate. It's things like that that are a little too far into the other types of organizations. The thing is in your fiscal sponsorship agreement, you could limit what they do. The problem is or the challenge with this is the public is donating to the fiscal sponsor, right? Who's out there publicizing, and the fiscal sponsor has a 501c3. The fiscal sponsoree is out there and they're using the EIN of the fiscal sponsor. What happens is it's very difficult when the fiscal sponsoree is out there to limit the activity that they're doing. It's also very difficult to tell the people giving them money, you can't restrict the funds that come in for them in that same way. So like if I'm the fiscal sponsor and I'm giving you my EIN and you're out there making money and someone donates to you, it's very difficult for me to tell them where it goes or how to funnel it. So the answer is I would try not to do that, but you can, in the fiscal sponsorship agreement, you can limit activity. Like you can tell a fiscal sponsoree, you can do this, but not that. You can, it within reason, right? The reason is because your federal exemption is at stake and you have to protect your nonprofit. So if there's things that they're doing that would jeopardize you either being audited or losing your nonprofit status, then you have the right per contract to tell them what they can do and what they can't do. But it would be very difficult to sort of meander through their funders and restrict funds that way.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. The insurance response here could be complicated as well. So I've mentioned how, of course, you want to double check with your agent and underwriter, find out if this program you're bringing on board as a sponsoree is going to be a good fit for them. And lobbying is a very good example of where a lot of these specialty insurance companies in the nonprofit arena, they don't like lobbying. And so they just simply won't jump in and provide the coverage. So you'd be creating, in essence, a gap in your liability protections. So, and sometimes if you're trying to just say, well, through the agreement that we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover you for everything other than lobbying, sometimes the insurance companies will still object to that, even if they're not on paper responsible. Their concern at that point is that even though in the contract it says they're not going to be responsible, they might still have to tender legal defense on your behalf just to clear and say they're not going to respond to you, which can incur some cost to them, even though it's written in black and white. So one of the options there would be maybe having the insurance for the sponsoree on a standalone policy. So maybe they're not using your sponsor insurance portfolio, they're getting their own sponsoree insurance portfolio to line up with what they're up to.
All makes good sense.
If I could jump in and answer Jim's question there, I saw in there, what about supporting a bond measure or a levy? What's interesting here is that, and Michael, again, you guys can correct me, Matt, you may say, well, we don't want to insure that, but technically, a bond measure or a levy is where the government is legislative. It's not taking the role of being the legislator, it's passing that to the people directly, right? So legislative advocacy and even legislative lobbying is allowed under a 501c3. So a nonprofit can take a position on a bond measure or a levy, and it's not, and raise money to actually support that work. It just starts getting really, really, you've got to be careful. You got to track your hours. You have to, put that in your calculations of grassroots lobbying. It gets very sophisticated, I should say. And it might be beyond the scope of a group that's fiscally sponsored to be able to track that differentiation. But Jim, I'm happy to talk to you offline if you'd like, because it's an interesting question you asked.
And the same concerns would come into play with the insurance side as well. So you just want to be really transparent and work with your agent to make sure everything's going to fly through on that side okay for you.
Yeah, I put in the chat because Tom had brought up how NPNS offers free low-cost insurance, and I thought it might be interesting to hear how that process works, because I know that's definitely a barrier for a lot of organizations.
Sure. So if you're in North Portland, we're particularly interested in helping you. I don't know if my camera's on or not, but to tell it to turn on. I don't
You're
know.
good. We see you.
All right. So the end result is that NPNS Inc. Now there's a NPCW, North Portland Community Works, which is closing, and that's been the fiscal sponsor for a lot of groups. But NPNS Inc., which is a Oregon nonprofit, but is applied for 501c3. It does provide insurance paid for mainly from the city for neighborhood associations. And we've been able to go and use that funding that comes for the neighborhood associations to be able to cover approximately 20 to 30 organizations that we can provide general liability and directors and officers insurance for groups that are either incorporated or not. Are you still there?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So anyhow, that's the basic stuff. We have a couple friends of various parks that are members, and some others that have just been accepted for that. So we'd be happy to help out and work with people on that. Similar situation is also for East Portland, EPN, which, and together we're providing services to the Southwest parks, where the city is paying for the D&O and general liability, also for Southwest trails.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So these are basically we're leveraging the city's funds to provide liability because it's required liability insurance, to provide D&O, directors and officers insurance, as well as liability to equal whatever's the city's requirements, which I think are roughly 2 million plus $1 million umbrella. So, and that's what we provide. And I'll give you, you guys have got my contact information, and we'll be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, great.
We are separate from the city. So
Mhm.
the city can't insure other groups directly, but it
Mhm.
can go through a nonprofit 501c3 to provide insurance, make sure that groups are covered.
And so you're just providing insurance to groups that they're not other 501c3s.
Oh, we actually, some of them are 501c3s.
Okay.
So,
Oh,
but the point I'm trying to get at is that essentially the whole why did this happen is the city requires that you have to have all this coverage if you're going to have something on a park property or the street or anything like that. And as a result, it started funding this for the different neighborhood associations and the district coalitions. And we've been able to leverage the funds that the city provides to provide services for a whole slew of groups. Vanport Mosaic, but it's allowed us to work with the BIPOC community a lot more. And that's why it's a really good vehicle for groups that want to work on some expanding in diversity and inclusiveness.
and I want to address Laura's question and then also add. So what I'm hearing is a 501c3 can provide insurance for another 501c3 without a fiscal sponsorship agreement. Is that true, Matt, Tom?
We'd still need that insurable interest generated most likely through a contract.
Yeah.
And that evidences that there is a connection between the two organizations.
But for example, there's a lot of friends groups who have an operating budget of, let's say, $5,000, $10,000, and but they are 501c3s, but they could get insurance through a contract with another 501c3 who's
Mhm.
willing to extend as like a cheaper option. Okay. Great. Laura, you had a question about, was that directed to Tom?
Yeah, we'll talk to you offline on that one.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, we're closing in on time, and I want to just make sure if there are any other questions before we thank Michael and Matt and Jim for tonight, and all of you for coming and bringing great questions. And
Is the PowerPoint going to be available?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we will, at the end of the summit, send out an email with any of the recordings as well as any of the materials that were shared. I think actually, so to that end, speaking of materials and resources, did you want me to share that final slide? Okay. So we get to end this evening on some fun places for you to spend the rest of your evening.
And I'm just going to apologize in advance because we didn't slip in Matt's contacts there. But I think what we could do, Jessica, is we could make sure that we put those in there as well. And then we can send you a new set so that when you send it out to everybody, they have all the links. But in the set that you would get, these links are clickable. So they'll click right through to those resources.
Thank you.
So that's it. And you have 5 minutes to spare. So go enjoy yourselves. Thank you everybody for coming. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night on some more parks fun. And do reach out to anybody with questions. And thank you all for sharing your wisdom.
Yep. Thanks.